Today you could be doing a lot of other things, cleaning out basements, cleaning up from the storms, getting ready for the next one. So thank you for your presence, because your presence makes this worship service worship. Just a couple of things along the lines of hospitality for you. We have visitor cards. These blue cards are especially for first-time visitors. If you are joining us for the first time, or if you've been here before and haven't given us a name and a way to contact you, we love people can get better. That's all part of our understanding of grace, of sanctifying grace that allows us to grow up into something more. We're not fixed. Even as we get older, we're not fixed with who we are, but we can become more with God's grace. And that's a big part of why we are seen and perceived as the people who foolishly do good things, sometimes when it seems futile. That may be the reason why when we read the words of Jesus, we aren't very offended, because we already assume we know what Jesus is going to say. United Methodists and our forebears are also pretty biblically literate. They have explored the scriptures. And in some ways, it has just kind of become part of the culture, and we become so insulated from the offensive words of Jesus that as I titled things today, it says, if you are not offended, you might well be a United Methodist. Because we just have that sense of optimism about people growing in grace. We have this sense that we can help change and transform the world by our actions. And because of that, perhaps we don't hear the offensive language. So let me talk about what Jesus says and why it is offensive. He says some really startling things in just a few sentences. First of all, he completely trashes the dietary code of the Jewish people. He's talking about eating his flesh and his blood. Well, present day kosher and halal say that you cannot eat the flesh of an animal, if you are so inclined. You cannot eat the flesh of an animal that still has its blood in it. So when he says this, he is offending people who have kept the dietary laws and the other laws of their faith tradition. It's as if I told you to stop doing good, if I told you to stop giving, if I told you to stop obeying the golden rule of the church and of Christianity, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love your neighbor, love God. It's almost as if I said that to you. It is so startling to them, because the dietary laws are not just about what people eat. It's about who they are and how they live and how they worship God. Then he says something even more startling. That's the dietary code. He equates himself with God. The commandment says, you shall have no other gods before me. This is one of the biggest scandals of Christianity. And it is something that we still have to speak to in interfaith circles, not over and against, but we just need to explain our understanding of this triune God. That Jesus is one with God. Jesus is not another God. We are not in violation of the commandments when we talk and experience Jesus as God. But to the people who are listening to him, this is back in the first century of the Common Era, to those people, it would have been offensive, it would have been heretical, it would have been scandalous. I present this to you because I think sometimes we do need to be a little bit offended by Jesus' words in order to be able to really receive the message and really live into the fullness of the grace that is offered us in this lifetime. His words stung those people, and they probably, in a different way, should sting us today. I've been thinking this week a lot about offensive words and offensive talk and being offended. So you and I know that there are people in this world who just enjoy being offensive. I've known a few of them, and I see a few head nods out there. There are some people for whom it is a way of life just to be offensive to other people, whether they are shock jocks or just your next door neighbor who seems to enjoy that kind of taunt by being offensive, whether it's knowing that perhaps you don't use a certain kind of language and they do, just to make you feel uncomfortable. Or people who bring up subjects that they know are going to be difficult. You know those people. That's not Jesus, though. I think Jesus is offending in a different way, and it's as Drew Entz said from our pulpit last week, it is hyperbole to some extent, and it's meant to get the attention of his followers. It's meant to get our attention today. It is shocking and it is offensive. So for us, then, the other side of the offensive and offended equation is, how do we respond? How do we read? How do we hear the words of Jesus that are somewhat offensive to us, that make us uncomfortable, that unsettle us? And then how do we receive that is something that is helpful for us and is helpful for the world. You see, taking offense is really a choice. We can be offended by our neighbor and just shun them and stay away from them. We can be offended by things that we see on the news and we can just turn it off. Church, we really don't have that choice because the words of Jesus are words for our instruction, for our development, for our guidance. They are words of life to us, and they are words of life to our neighbors. So we can't just shut it off. Instead, what we might do is take this offensive teaching, or any of the offensive teachings of Jesus, and we might analyze it a little bit. We might pray about it a little bit and ask if there is a place in it for us for growth. I know one of the most offensive passages in American culture is the one about the vineyard workers. You know those people who come and they negotiate a wage and they start work like decent working people do early in the day, and then more people come and more people come, and at the end of the day, the boss says, guess what? I'm going to pay everybody the same thing whether you worked for 2 hours or 10. That's offensive. That is probably, in my experience, one of the things that's most offensive in churches I've served. Whenever we get to that passage, people just shake their heads and they don't like it because it's not fair. Instead of receiving in that teaching the fullness of God's grace, that there's no timeline for when we receive God's invitation. We don't have to fulfill some particular moment in time in terms of accepting God's invitation in order to receive everything, all of the grace that everybody else has received. So when we hear the stories, allow ourselves to be offended a bit. You can allow yourself to be offended a little bit if you allow that stance of being offended to move you forward, to allow you to experience that kind of grace that helps us grow, helps us learn, helps us improve, not just to be better people, but to be better followers of Jesus Christ. We hope we're going to offer some of that to you in a couple of weeks. We're going to start a series in September about how to read the Bible. And I'm going to tell you now, this is the little trailer as if it were a movie. There are going to be things, I'm pretty sure, that we are going to bring up that are going to be offensive. If you read scripture on a regular basis, or if you listen as if for the first time in worship, you're likely to be offended, and that's okay. because it is going to propel us forward. It is going to move us forward as human beings. It's going to move us forward as the church that is responsive to, not reactive to, but responsive to Christ's teachings. It is going to take us beyond just the task and into the harder relational long-term work. I talked about the M&Ms, the Methodists and the Mennonites in mission places, in places of disaster and great human need. It is hard to stay. It is much easier to be the people who show up in the first couple of days and hand out food and water and pray prayers with people and then leave town. The harder work is to stay. The harder work is to see that it's not about getting a job done, but that it is about the people. And that going on a mission trip, whether it is close by for a day or two or going overseas, is more about getting to know people and to grow with them rather than to offer them something as if they are merely clients receiving from our goodness. The gospel is offensive in that way. It says it's not enough just to pat somebody on the head and say, I hope you have a good life. Here, I'm going to give you a bottle of water. It requires much more of it. It requires taking it in, and that's the real teaching here, taking in the flesh and blood of Christ. It's why we practice an open table. It's more of our do-gooderism. Not every church that you attend, if you go traveling and you stop into another church, not every church is going to welcome you to the table. But here we welcome you to the table. We welcome everyone to the table. We don't ask for any credentials. We don't ask if you're baptized. We don't ask anything of you except that you wish to experience God in those moments in some way. We do not restrict access because we believe in the very radical and offensive words of Jesus that he speaks in this passage. If you will take this in, you will learn and you will grow with me. But you have got to commit at least to that much. Somebody summed up how this is useful to us, one of the commentaries I read in the last couple of weeks. And these are wise words. The passage is not intended to reinforce complacency or discourage us from witnessing the gospel of Jesus Christ to others, but it will help us remember that our calling is a strange and difficult one. A strange and difficult one. It is more than skin deep, reaching beneath the surface of our lives and into our workplaces, bank accounts, family relationships, eating habits, daily schedules. Boy,